Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Fagam Radian here at the Dubai Air Show, where our coverage is sponsored by FLIR Systems. And we're talking to John Elbon, who is with the Boeing company. You're the Vice President for Global Sales and Marketing for Space Exploration. Normally, when we think about the Dubai Air Show, we tend to not necessarily see as large of a Boeing space component here, but you guys have debuted the Starliner, and we talked to Tony here about the spacecraft. But I want to ask you about your whole strategy for engaging international partnerships in space, and what does that mean when you guys do everything from manned spacecraft, unmanned spacecraft, to the launch vehicles, as well as to the International Space Station?
I think working in space, exploring space, has the unique characteristic of bringing together countries internationally. If you look at the International Space Station, which has been on orbit for over 15 years now, that was put together by countries who didn't necessarily cooperate with each other before they started working on the International Space Station. So it has this real kind of diplomacy lever of being able to build partnerships and work together. We're now talking about going to Mars, and that's a really hard mission. And it's going to take the resources of the world to do that. So it's important to us at the Boeing company to be a leader in building those relationships, pulling those countries together, helping to be the catalyst for that exploration. When humankind puts the first footprints on Mars, we want to be part of that. That's really cool.
That is really cool. And if you think about it, programs like this that gets us, Americans in an American spacecraft into orbit, but then over to the moon, starts to become a very, very key thing that then reignites the imagination for those of us of the moon generation who remember staying home from school to watch a moon mission and follow it really, really closely. Talk to us a little bit about this region in particular and why at the Dubai Air Show, because both Saudi Arabia and the Emirates have committed themselves to becoming spacefaring nations. Saudi astronaut was the first Arab going into space. We've since seen other astronauts from the region. Talk to us a little bit about why this region is so important for your guys' strategic plans and how they can be sort of a mutual symbiosis.
Sure. I think the countries of this region, like countries around the world, are very interested in starting space programs as a way of jump-starting innovation and technology in their countries, stimulating their students to study math and science. And so it's a natural thing to want to get involved in space. For us, it's important that we build relationships with those countries as they're making those steps, as they're getting started, so that we can leverage those relationships going forward. It's just a natural thing for us to work with these countries across a broad range of aerospace products. Space is kind of in our DNA, and we'd like very much to be a part of these countries coming into the spacefaring nations of the world.
That is very NASA sounding, but at the end of the day, you guys are also a business. So what are some of the specific sorts of partnerships you guys want to strike? Is it on the subsystems level? Walk us through some of the places, in some of the conversations, and I understand that you can't be as open about some of those, but what are some of the ways that you're building this participation from the very small to things that may be to the very big?
So we started with the UAE, for example, in a partnership of a program called Genes in Space, where a UAE student was selected to do an experiment on the space station. And it really turned out good. I think you'll hear more about that in the conference here. And I'm hopeful that as we go into the future, we can talk with countries of this region about their citizens, their astronauts flying on Starliner to space station, them developing experiments that could fly on space station. And then we can develop partnerships where those countries could build components of the missions that go to Mars. And we can all do that together.
You've been a long-time space guy. Space is always seen as a great frontier, but it's become a much more commercialized frontier. And there are folks from Virgin Galactic to others that are looking at sort of space tourism and something that will become routine, but anybody who knows going 17,500 miles an hour is not routine. Are you at all concerned that some of these commercial initiatives, particularly if some of them go very badly, could boomerang badly on the industry itself and what we're trying to do with human space exploration that is in the much more organized, structured space exploration? It's a I'm not saying any of these companies are going to play cavalier with people, but do you have that concern as a longtime space guy that that could reflect badly on the whole industry, God forbid, if one of these space buses or tourist things go badly, as they will, right? Space Shuttle was the best tended vehicle on the planet, and sadly we had 2 accidents with it.
Space is traveling in space is still a difficult and challenging thing. As we design the vehicles that we take in space, it's very important for us that they're safe and they're reliable, and that we do everything we can to protect the people that will be flying on them. That's our philosophy and all we do as the Boeing company, and we'll continue that in space. I think that it was interesting as we went through our 100-year anniversary last year to think about how far aviation had come in 100 years. And I think if you were here interviewing me 100 years from now, we would be talking about, wow, you remember 100 years ago where commercial space was? And look at where it is today and how much in that 100 years it's advanced. And that's kind of where we are relative to commercial space. We're just getting it started, and it's difficult to predict where it will go, but it's very clear that it's taking off, and like I say, 100 years from now we will have done things we couldn't imagine today.
Do you think that folks, though, have to be tempered in their expectation that it may not be safe or as safe as we would like for the first X number of years, but that eventually it'll become as an airliner has become?
There's a great introduction in a book that Wernher von Braun wrote in the 50s that talks about what you just said, which is it's very important to have aspiration and vision and not be constrained by what we can imagine. But then the engineering and physicists have to take over and figure out what we can really do as we're going forward. So it's important to keep that in check, to understand that we can do what we can do. But then you got to go after that, and within the realms of reality, accomplish all we can.
John, thanks very much. Best of luck, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.